See if, oh yeah, now I can write stuff.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah, cool. That's where I found it. It just didn't go through the, oh, yes. Okay.
But it's not connected. Is it what?
Hmm?
Oh, I'm not seeing it. Should I refresh?
Yeah. I don't see the chat. That's funny. I'm gonna write something else. See the chat? Thanks. Oh, I see your comment. Hello on this chat, but I can't see it on the same window, and you don't see my chat, and I can't respond here. So there's definitely something broken, but if people ask questions, I can at least see it. Okay, cool. All right, hey everybody, we're gonna get started. Last week I did this quick underpainting in acrylic, and I'm just gonna work on this today, starting with oil. So I am just coming in. This is all acrylic today. I have my full palette of oil paints, meaning that I have like 2 of each primary. I have my earth tones, and I have white. It's just a really basic palette. And what I always suggest for people coming in to paint and start their session out is we're gonna mix up like a really thin kind of dark color. And what I use for that are transparent hues like ultramarine blue and burnt umber and a little bit of, I'm using like a quinacridone instead of alizarin, but it's just a way to get a little bit of like a dark neutral. I use a mixture of terp or Gamsol and a little bit of linseed oil to thin that dark mixture down. And what I get is a drawing mix is what I kind of refer to this as. Like it's what I draw with on a painting. It's kind of like a little neutral dark I'm mixing right now. And as I'm looking at this picture, like we have some colors, we have some movement, but we have 0 definition. There's lots more to add. So I feel like what I want to start with is just starting to draw in and establish the darker compositional areas. Rather than get sucked into, I have to make this detailed, I have to make these look like flowers as soon as possible. I do not. In fact, the longer I wait, the more attention I pay to the other aspects of what I'm painting, the better it typically looks. So by other aspects, I'm trying to like create a little shape within all of this madness, right? Just to unify like a nice dark area within the shape that is interesting and like create some contrast with parts of the picture that I'm hoping to develop and have, you know, kind of more of a focal area. So I really like that little hint of a light, like white flower coming in. I think that could become something.
I'm kind of taking this dark mix and I'm just like moving around, picking up marks that are already there. I'm not trying to draw each and every leaf that I see, but what I do is I kind of like look at my painting and then I look at the marks that are there. What reminds me of a leaf? I'll check the setup. I might find something, you know, halfway similar to it. I always wanted to paint like large, intricate florals, and I feel like one of the challenges that I faced and that I see people face is just getting really, really tight, and losing like the life, you know? You don't want to lose the life of it, so don't draw it to death. But it really does take, you know, some faith that it's going to work out. So if we simplify this down to dark shapes, I'm not going to see like lovely flowers and leaves right away. And I'm just going to have to hope and trust that by the time I get to that point where like it is the time to put them in, I will be able to do that, and it will all be better because I put in all this like prep work, kind of setting the painting up. So moving around, you know, but I'm still kind of like focusing on that dark shape. I don't want to make it too simple and too connected and like too plain. But we need that structure, so I'm just, you know, I'm one to squint and try to paint with my eyes half closed. And what I'm trying to get is just a shape that goes through all of this chaos and just kind of unifies things. And I'm going to build on top of that shape, so there'll be leaves, there'll be, you know, stems, vines, the whole thing. But it needs to fit within that shadow. And maybe this is going to be the picture, but I'm going to make that picture right here a part of the overall dark shape. All right, so I'm really liking like a little detail in this area. I feel like there could be some really nice kind of cast shadows onto leaves in here. But mainly, I can't lose sight of the fact that even though this is all gonna be like chaos, I'm gonna put some marks so I can like make these into something. What I really have to remember is that this is a very like S-shaped composition to me. So I need some darks up here so that it really takes us like this way. We're gonna go through here and come down there. Okay, so we gotta figure out where are the darks, because those are the sign markers that I am gonna leave so that people follow this path. Now this still life setup is gonna move. Occasionally things move. People are always like, but it moved. Well, there is no way I'm going to paint every little thing that I'm seeing here. I am really looking at this and studying it, but I'm not trying to duplicate it. So there's a difference between, you know, painting what you see and painting exactly what you see. And so I'm really looking for specifics, like on individual areas, but overall, if this changed a little bit, it's not the end of the world. I can pretty much take the information that I need. I love all these little light green, kind of sage colored puffs here. So let's think about how these are gonna balance this side. I don't want these to be too contrasting. Okay, so back to our big S-shape composition. I feel like a little dark here to kind of curve that around this way. A leaf could be really beautiful. Let's give that a little flick. Now that's an element that went on pretty strong, and I'm okay with it. So even at this stage, I'm thinking like, I like this direction. If you can see that little V shape I just drew, that's gonna become an element. It'll be a leaf, it'll be something. But I'm thinking direction wise, like it comes down this way. And this element cuts across. And I like that just from an abstract point of view. Have to make sure that we are moving around and moving through as we think about like the path that these darks are going to create. So it's not about getting like individual details, and yet there is going to be just a constant pull toward like, oh, let me fix this, let me draw this, let me get this finished, let me make this look right. All right, so I'm feeling okay about this. Now we have to decide what is going to happen out here. Is this going to be kind of vague and backgroundy? And the answer is no. There's something in this area, in the setup, that I really, really like, and that I definitely want to try and get out of this painting, and that is the color differences between like this flower and the one back there and the one that's smaller and over here. So that I really do want to get. I think that having like a little faded back here kind of flower could be really nice. So I'm just gonna like draw that in. Again, that thin down mix. Might even just, I'm gonna put a little medium on my palette and just glaze that line out so it's not too strong. So now we can see like another form could go back in here. Da, da, da. All right, I feel like we need a few more marks to like establish just the beginnings of these elements up here, curving through this way. Sometimes it's just about like laying the groundwork for things, moving through. If you put one mark here, how's it going to balance on the other side? Okay, so then there's like a little X that goes across. So this to me is like the major kind of S-curve shape in here, and then there's this little directional thing here, and I'm just gonna have this picture be very like unfinished at the bottom so that we're really focusing that attention in here. Okay, so at this point I've done some drawing. I'm stepping back. We're gonna see if there's anything else I should or want to do with this drawing mix of paint. And I think I'll just throw in like a few more kind of random, oops, let's not knock the painting over. All right, there we go. Still just using like a really neutralized kind of thin, dark mixture of color. And as I said, this is now oil paint going on over acrylic. Okay, I think it's time to move into a little opaque color. And I would like to start with the background. Now that's going to take me a moment to mix up this paint, and sadly I don't have a camera trained on my palette, but I will one day soon. Some technical things to work out. So what I'm going to do is just mix up a couple little color variations of this kind of like orangey, salmony red color. I was gifted a very lovely tube of permanent rose, and it is gorgeous. Beautiful color. Definitely using that in this mixture. And I see a little yellow in the color, so I'm going to go for some yellow ochre. Actually, you know what? This is silly because what I can do is the following. Oh, we flipped. There we go. All right, so we're color mixing here. And I'm seeing a little bit more yellow in here. I like to take out my ingredients. I like to kind of have them by the side. I don't worry too much about keeping these perfectly clean. That is a beautiful color. I mean, I just love that color. But I can tell you right now, if I were to make my entire background that color, those flowers would look boring, I think, at this stage. I want to like reserve some saturation for later. Meaning like I don't want to go fully saturated on this background color on my first layer. I kind of want to build up to that degree of saturation. And so I'm going to take a little bit of cobalt teal. I made a similar color to that. It's kind of that like salmony, it's a very intense like magenta in there. A little bit of yellow, so it's sort of orange, and then opposite that orange is going to neutralize it. It's just a little bit of blue. You could see what happens when I put a whole bunch in there. There's a tiny bit of cadmium red going into this. I really like that darker color. That's nice. All right, so now I have like a darker version, more saturated version. Beautiful color. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be the color I want, but it's a beautiful color. So I'm making a little bit more in terms of like a slight variation because I really feel like the background, it can't be that flat in this case. If it's just one solid color or too little activity, then all of the marks that are happening are going to feel really kind of weird. So I want some color variations ready to go. I know there's beautiful like dark shadow colors. I'm starting to think about those. And this is something that I repeat all the time to my students, and that is that 80% of your time painting is going to be spent on your palette. Or if you're a pastel artist, you're going to be figuring out like your color mixture and layering before you begin. Typically. All right, so here's my little array of color. It might be a good starting point. Let's see how it goes. I've got, turn this back a little bit. There we go. Not bad. All right, so starting with, let's go for the lightest, brightest color. Let's just put a pop of really, really strong oil on this acrylic underpainting just to see what happens. So I'm not gonna put it like directly next to an object, you know, because I'm safe like that. But wow, look at the saturation, the richness of that color is gorgeous. Wow. Okay. Again, I'm kind of thinking in shapes. You might as well make little directional marks that lead the viewer through. I like that color, but that, to be honest, I feel like that's a little bit like warm. Not loving it. So wasn't what I was hoping it would be. And I'm going to remix it. Okay. All right. So we are remixing this color. It's a little bit warm. Let's go for our, let's see how much my palette is in view. There we go. Okay. We're going to do our quinacridones and our permanent rose. And let's take a little bit of white. Put that there. It's much more purpley and cooler. But I want it to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to experiment with this ultramarine blue. That's definitely darker. Very violet, and I want to try it out. So I'm going to take this darker brush. Okay. Well, that is working. I just put that in the shadow side, and that's approximately what I need for that area. Okay, so we've got a little ultramarine blue to add to the quinacridones and the permanent rose. All right, I'm just trying to figure some way to give the background a little bit of like energy and not be flat. It's challenging. The flowers are really easy to find lots of things happening. The background can be a bit more static and sort of lifeless if you're not careful with it. So in the spirit of keeping it fresh, I'm going to try to paint fairly quickly and just sort of, I'm going to grab like a scrubbier brush, and by that I mean one that is bristle, just like that, because it can tolerate the scrubbing. All right, so here we've got, now I really want to focus like the richer colors along that kind of like S-shaped compositional shape that I was doing. And as we move out, I'm going to let those colors get lighter, grayer, and less important, I guess. No, that's not the right word. They're definitely important, but less weight in the composition, I guess. So we get here, and I like what's going on now, like on the underpainting, so I'm sort of using that as my guidepost. I'm gonna go a little bit lighter, a little bit more blue in that color. Again, this is a very early layer in this painting. So I'm really keeping this paint fairly thin. I'm not really building up the surface yet. And I'm moving around. Anytime I have a color on my brush that's a little bit unique, like this is a really isolated color, and I don't want isolated colors. So I really want to move this color throughout. I might even like find a little place to sneak it into the background that way. That could become a leaf. Maybe this mark needs a okay, I like that direction. Okay, but back to our block-in over here. I want to emphasize these shapes just a little bit. There's so much going on here that's really lovely. So I'm going to add some contrast behind that light shape. Let's go a little bit lighter. All right, and I think I have some nice like marks that I kind of outlined. I made these little leaf shapes and I kind of like those, so I will go for those. I'm gonna leave that one. I don't know if you can see this that clearly. Maybe you can, but there's this little light line. I'm gonna try to leave it. I messed it up just a little bit, but that's okay. So sometimes I'm just kind of painting in, and I might decide to leave an unpainted area that is shaped just like the leaf I would like to fill there, and I will do so. You can also change colors really at your will. You can do whatever you like. This is kind of the fun part of painting. If you put it in now, chances are you will be creating something that you're interested in and figuring out how to keep these marks in your painting and like make them work as flowers or as leaves or as background marks. That's kind of the fun of this approach. So make your marks and then we're gonna figure out how to keep them. And just like I've been, talking about, my first thought when I'm like putting down these little brush strokes is like direction and color and like just the abstract qualities, how they're gonna sit in this painting. Now, I think the conventional wisdom here is like, in a background, use a big brush. However, I say no. At this point, for this background, I really want like a fairly small brush because I'm really thinking in these like little color shapes, and that brush size feels kind of right to me. The color has stopped feeling kind of right to me, so I need to mix up a little bit more. Give it like a little brightness. Just kind of like making marks that overlap and like weave together at this stage, and I feel like that's so much more interesting to me, like to paint, and it allows me to like find new things in the painting, rather than like painting it like I would if I were painting a room in my house or something, like you don't need to paint it flat. Find a way to, even with filling in color areas, like give it a little bit of a dynamic quality, you know? Really think about like how you're putting those marks on. And at the same time I'm filling this color in, I'm sort of like carving into this grouping. And I'm thinking about balance, trying to think moving around as well. Changing up my color just slightly here and there. And like if I make a mark on one side, I tend to want to go to the other side. You know, if I make a mark up here, I'm going to start thinking about like what happens to balance it. So there's this really cool area here where I feel like the leaves are really dark against, maybe they're not that dark, but they're very like saturated green against a really nice saturated strong background. So I'm gonna set that up, and all of this information like already was here. It's just now getting amplified. So this layer of oil is just to go back and like completely amplify what you've already decided on in your acrylic painting. And you can add to it, of course, you know, and we can do more layers. I can let this dry and come back and paint more leaves over it, which I think I will. So, you know, but I mean that like as I put that acrylic underpainting on, I was like thinking, okay, leaves here, darker here. And so I made marks that sort of, you know, represent that. They might not have been that descriptive, but they were marks and it was happening. And now I'm just trying to like go back, find the marks that work for the thing I am trying to do. Like for example, here's this little leaf grouping. I want to make sure I leave a little space for that leaf. Like that orangey color next to the greens, and like kind of with the greens weaving through that area. And this might be something that I kind of come back to over the course of a couple little layers to develop and like make it more complex and kind of weave stuff in and out of it. So we'll come back, but this is a little start to that. I want to make sure I get some negative shapes kind of situated between the stems, and you don't see much, but I will, you know, be able to come back over. So this side of the arrangement has some cast shadow kind of on that wall plane. I need to do something to address that because I do think it's an important part of what I'm looking at, and I want to like include that, I guess. Like all this stuff in here could pop more if I just push that a little darker. And as I put in this like dark, I don't know, burgundy magenta kind of situation, I know that I can still come back and go quite a bit darker. I can really like put stuff into that color to break this up and give it another level of form and information. You might notice I'm skipping some areas. I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm going to do here. I might put a little flower just half off. Maybe it's too tight in the middle. Maybe it's too formal. We're going to see how we feel. really like the deepest values of that magenta are kind of happening through here, and they're happening like really close to some very beautiful like hanging things that are going to come in later, and these like sage colored kind of whatevers they are plants or flowers, but yeah, they're sage colored. And I think this deep red shadow color could be a nice little accent for those colors and really make that pop. There's also some really beautiful like kind of yellowy tiny little like spray roses or something in the shadows that I think I'm going to try to put in. So we'll just see if we can throw in a couple marks that could become spray roses. Oh look, I've transitioned into flowers accidentally because I had that brush color, or that color on my brush was like really useful for that. So now that I'm thinking like blocking in flowers, maybe I'll just do a little bit of movement through here. So there's the big compositional shape, and then there's these little small moments that we can kind of also relate to one another and relate to the overall shape. And I mean, painting is just so complicated, or it can be, or it can just be really simple. I don't know. So you might notice I am not really diving into greens. Will there be green? There might be a kind of green, but it's not going to be like a vibrant green because I just can't see that working with this like very limited color scheme. I think will be better. So the greens are going to be heavily leaning toward that sort of lavender once we get there. So let's talk about that in a moment. Just like the slightest color temperature change can make such a big difference in whether it fits in the painting or not. So when you're playing guitar and you play a bad note that does not fit in the key, that is known as a clam. And there are definitely colors that are clams. So, a little too warm and this color does not fit. And that really gives me an idea about how limited my choices with the greens are going to be, because I just can't break too far out of what's already here. So I'm really setting myself up. The longer I wait, it's like they really have to fit into that color scheme. And I'll tell you, I just came upon an area with a green on it. Now that looks very barely green. I'm not sure if you can even see it on the screen, but it's kind of a sage green. It's a nice color. I think that will fit, and I'm going to leave that little mark there as a note to myself because that's kind of the direction that I am imagining for these colors. Now this area has a whole lot of leaves kind of streaming down, but I'm going to start by saying I got to get something in here and like reestablish the shape. The shape is the most important. So we want this like X shape thing here, and I'm going to take all this down and we'll just paint like the little leaves kind of streaming down over that. But at least now that shape is pretty much like consistent and we're seeing it. Okay, we're almost done with the background. But we've got to get a really nice color for that lightest, brightest part. So I'm gonna work a little bit more carefully on that. I like to hold my palette knife up just to see where I'm at, and I am nowhere near where I want to be. Nowhere near to the point where I just took that attempt and we move that off to the side. We're going to start fresh. The color I'm looking for, again, this is another area that I really like, so I left it alone. That's my little note to self. That's the color that I really kind of have in mind for my mixture. And if you saw what I just held up, it was like very dark and very like muddy looking. So something is amiss. We will get to the bottom of it. We're gonna take our quinacridone red to start, and maybe I'll just do a little palette view. Oh, is that good or bad? I don't know. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Taking our quinacridone red and a little bit of white. I just want to really see what this is going to give us. Okay, let's hold that up to this. And I'm holding it up to my painting. It looks like it's kind of on the right track, but instead of adding yellow as I have been, what I want is a little cadmium red. Let me grab more of that. So if I had to say that color that I currently have is a little too pink, tending almost a little bit more toward like purple. The natural inclination, add the opposite, that's going to be yellow, but yellow made it look warm and muddy. So this is going to tend it away from purple and a little bit more toward orange, but keeping it like squarely in that red hue. So I hope this works. Let's try it out. Oh, perfect. Okay, so that is actually exactly the color. That's what we needed. It's quinacridone, it's cadmium, it's white, and maybe like the tiniest bit of yellow ochre. So now we can go back and paint it in. So that is the really, like, I think such a satisfying feeling when you go to figure out a color and you're like, yeah, that's it. But it does take a minute. Sometimes you only have your best guess. And by sometimes, I mean literally all the time. That's all we start with is just a guess. So if you're sure that it's got quinacridone, start with that, hold it up and compare it. Okay? And when you compare it, you're gonna look for things to either be, are you too dark? Are you too light? Is your color the right hue? Meaning like maybe you need a little bit of a different red to be closer to what we're seeing. So there's so many different directions you can go, but the most important step, and one that I see everybody skip, is comparing the color. Really, even if it's wrong, you have to hold it up to tell in what way is it wrong. All right, at this point, I could use a bigger brush, so. I've got this little, I'm not using like a lot of terp. I'm just using a wiped out brush. I'm not even gonna terp my brush to clean it. We're gonna see. And this is like one of the most pure saturated colors in the painting. I feel like it's very important. So I'm gonna put a little bit of oil on the palette. We're gonna pick up as much of this color as we can on the brush, and then we'll just scrub that through. So just wiping the brush was sufficient to really get this color pretty effectively on the brush, and it's a very saturated color, so it would dull down pretty quickly. Still thinking directionally, even though, you know, I might come back break this up with something else. I'm not sure. Did you know it would take so long to paint a background? I was always baffled by like how to paint backgrounds and what to do about backgrounds and how they related. But the minute you stop thinking about it as like a background, it's just like another part of your painting that needs direction, it needs color, it needs like a composition and a flow. Then it becomes a little bit easier. And you're kind of free because you can sort of do any number of treatments. Now I need some variation. This is just getting a little too one note. And I want something a little cooler, so definitely we will go for the quinacridone magenta. Oh, hey, and also, if anyone happens to like see a chat window, if there is indeed anyone there, you could just type a quick hello. So I know it's working because I had a little bit of difficulty kind of syncing everything up since it's not totally YouTube that I'm using. So if there's any way that you could find your chat window, and maybe you cannot because that was a problem the other day, that would be great. If you see it, say hello. That is a nice pink, and whenever I have the opportunity to put pink next to red, I'm going to take it. I mean, it is a lot, but I want to try to make this work with this crazy color. At least for now. We can always tone this down. We're going to come back over. All things are fixable, changeable, and not set in stone. So, you know, I'm just going to go for it. And I would definitely recommend, if you've got a color in mind, if you can see it in your setup or in your reference, and, you know, it just kind of feels like maybe that's the way to go and that's your intuition about it, go for it. You can always respond to like what happens and what you actually put on your canvas when you come back and look at it next time. we are getting to a point where like there's a nice amount of paint beginning to build up on the surface. And so you might have just noticed, like, one of my favorite things about oil paint is you can just really softly run your brush over the surface and get brush strokes to just be a little bit more calm, a little bit less separate without being over blended. Yeah, I'm giving this area like a really feathery, kind of light, brushy treatment, because I don't know if you remember, I was talking about perhaps adding some hint of like a specific flower. We've got all these little tiny pink petal flowers. I don't know what they are, so don't ask me for their names. I don't know. But we are, how are we going to do that? Let's do that. First, I'll just scrub all of this paint in a little bit. I'm backing up. I'm seeing how everything's going. I've got my dark shape that I established at the beginning of today's session. I think that's still holding up. I haven't lost it. I haven't painted it out. I haven't, you know, otherwise ruined that structure in any way yet. And I will continue to try not to do that. All right, I do feel like I want to see a little bit of a darker, like deeper shadow color in here. And I know I'm not going to get this all in one day, but let's begin to just sink back a little bit deeper. So I'm putting like some blue in there. I also really want to see what a little Viridian would do in this color. Thanks for the chat, Gary. I don't know if I can respond. I'm going to try. All right. Well, thank you so much, Gary. Progress has been made. I can at least see what people are writing, and we'll see if my responses come back. We'll see what happens. Okay. Now, that's right. I was going to do a mixture with Viridian. I'm just going to put this down. It seems to just auto flip at... Okay, we're just crooked. That's how it's going to be. So, here's my palette. I'm going to consolidate. Sometimes that's a nice thing to do. Right, and we've got, like, I wanted that deeper shadow color on lower right side. So I'm gonna mix, hopefully you can, nope, it's not in view, whoops. Okay, we'll get it. Okay, what I will do is consolidate just a little bit more so I can mix in a place that you can actually see. All right. So Viridian is a really beautiful, I mean, in a way that does not look like what I would call a beautiful green as is, but the way that it mixes, I think is just amazing. So when you mix that with something like quinacridone, you get this like super, just kind of saturated grayish purple. It's a really beautiful color. And that is with a little bit of ultramarine blue in it. So you can really mix that with things that I think give it a lot of character. I especially love the mixtures with anything quinacridone or alizarin. So you can mix it with quinacridone magenta. And I don't mean anything because I think there are other quinacridones that, but I'll say magenta and red for sure. All right, and then we'll just pop that back up. And we'll put in a little bit of this shadow color just to kind of try to deepen that space. Maybe up through here. It just keeps so much nice saturation. I love that mixture. It's such a nice, it's so useful. I just use it all the time. I find so many places to mix those two colors together. The range is pretty impressive that it makes. We're going to clean this brush right off. We're going to just, hold on, so one more thing I want to do with this color. As soon as I clean the brush, of course, that's what I want to do, is just get back in there and put in a few more areas just to kind of give myself that effect of the darker color in there. Okay. Now I don't want to go too much longer on this live today, but I do want to start something that we can work on next time, and that is those little flowers that I mentioned. I have wet oil paint down. I talked about like scrubbing through this area, so the paint is not like soaking the surface by any means, but there's some wet oil paint. It's kind of a consistency that I can work into pretty easily, but it's not like a dry canvas. So that to me is the perfect time to start hinting at little half kind of ideas of flowers, and I'll just try and do that with a few marks of my brush. And then today, you know, we can just kind of start there, and next time we can sharpen. We can go in with the background color, we can highlight part of, you know, the brush stroke just to kind of bring that to life a little bit. But I love to kind of like plant the seed for future painting, right? Like I'll make myself a little bit of a note that I can turn into a flower later. And right into that wet paint, we get some nice soft marks. Nothing is too, you know, sharp or too contrasting because I'm painting onto that wet surface. And I really don't want these to be like terribly strong compositionally. I want these to be like a little, almost like a texture. A little too light, but that's okay. Gives it the idea. And like I said, anytime you've got a strong color, you're working in one area, especially in a situation like this, let's find a place to share that color around. That's a funny place to put it, but let's put it there. And I just looked down at my palette and I just have so much beautiful leftover paint that I honestly feel like I want to throw down a few marks of color just to like make use of that situation. And I don't mean just like indiscriminately, I'm just gonna throw paint everywhere because I have it. It's just I've got a lot of useful colors and I really hate to see that have to get remixed every time I go to paint. So some of these marks are just to give me like the permission to make marks, because if you want to make a loose painting, you really can't just like paint a tight painting and then start making marks, you know. You sort of have to like bake in the marks from the very beginning, and they're not exactly random. They're not descriptive, but they're not random. Always kind of thinking about like that big compositional shape, direction of the mark, how much contrast is going to be built in, and you know, how is that amount of contrast going to affect like that overall composition. So same thing I did here, I just kind of scratched in a few little flowers. I want to do something to this area. If you remember, I was talking about this at the very beginning of the painting, and I painted this like negative shape around that thing. Now, don't think I forgot. No, I absolutely did forget. But now that I'm here again, I remember. And I see it, and I'm like, oh, yeah, let me fill that in with a little bit of paint to give that some form. And then not only that, I'm going to start to just like lay in maybe another flower, and I want to get a color that is somewhat related to the background, and that one is because it has some of the magenta, like the quinacridone color on the palette. It's in my brush, so I'm just sort of laying in like a, I don't know, a soft start of that shape. It's not going to be, you know, really developed at this point, but maybe something there. I like the color compared to this like underpainting color. I just have to make sure to keep that really strong when I get there. And I want some like brambly marks here that I don't want to just put over the top later. So I want to start to like scratch in a few things that I can turn into marks and leaves. And then I'll stop. So. I'm gonna go around and add these little marks and kind of flicking through some of the paint if it's maybe a little bit too distinct and like sitting on the surface and just, you know, looking like a big old mark of paint. Maybe you might, and I'm gonna do this now, just go through and kind of take your brush and you're like flicking across. You're just getting that to like be woven into the surface a little bit. And most importantly, we are trying to get rid of any marks that are going to give us trouble at our next session. So the next time I go to paint this, I don't want to have like a big line that now I'm like, ugh, I have to paint over this giant, you know, super dark defined edge. I am going to leave everything as open as I can until I absolutely have to define what needs to be defined. All right, but that was the first layer of oil, so there's plenty more to go with this painting and things that we can do here to kind of develop this. But I feel like, I mean, overall, I think it went okay tonight. You know, no huge warning bells went off, so I think we're good. So I will see you next time when we work on this a little bit more. Thank you so much for watching.